This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. I am thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, my brilliant friend, Sullivan Summer. Growing up as a Black transracial adoptee with white adoptive parents, Sullivan was actively discouraged from identifying as Black by her adoptive mother. She shares about her recent decision to change her full name as a sign of identity reclamation, and we also discuss the intersection of adoption, race, and the United States' history of slavery. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Sullivan Summer. Welcome, Sullivan.
Hi, Haley.
I'm so excited to hear your story. Would you share that with us, please?
Yes, I'm happy to. So I was born in 1977 in New Hampshire. So mine was a private adoption arranged through the hospital that I was born at. My adoptive parents were infertile. They wanted children really, really badly and couldn't have children. I think they learned about adoption because my father, who is a carpenter, had been doing work on the house of a college professor. So it was a customer of his, and the college professor and his wife had adopted a child. And my father had always gotten very close with the customers whose house he worked on. And I don't know exactly how that conversation would have gone, but essentially the customer said, well, we adopted a baby through the local hospital, and there was a social worker there at the hospital that helped us. The term that was always used to me was the social worker. I've since Googled her. She's long dead now, but done some research on her. And this was a hospital administrator who, didn't have she was a high school graduate and worked at the hospital. So sort of no training, no formal schooling, but she was the quote unquote hospital social worker. And she also arranged my adoption as well. And so I was born, stayed in the hospital for 3 days, and then was delivered by this hospital administrator to my parents' house. My parents had said they had always really wanted children. My parents had very difficult childhoods, very difficult upbringings, a lot of trauma in their own childhood, which is why I think they wanted, the quote unquote children of their own as a do-over, as a way to have the family that they never had growing up. And one of the things that I received from them after much begging and asking later in life was a baby book. And inside the baby book, they had put a newspaper clipping. And it was a newspaper clipping from before I was born. And it was a Dear Abby letter from a pair of adoptive parents who had written an anonymous Dear Abby to the birth mother of their daughter. And they signed it Something to Live For. And my parents had saved this clipping in my baby book from a time, again, before I was born. They were not the parent. They did not write it. It was not from them, but had signed it Something to Live For, which said to me that, yes, this was my parents, and this is what they wanted a child for. They wanted something to live for.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yes. I have to say, finding the clipping was something I only discovered about a year ago, but it is like these pieces of validation, right? And I know we'll talk about that and we'll get there. But, as a child, all the feelings you always have and at least for me, were always invalidated. This was one of those things where I was like, but what I felt was true that whole time. I was right. But there's Something to Live For. I've also since found some writing of theirs, emails and the letters that they wrote to, the court in the midst of, my adoption, because it took about 9 months between my birth and the time it was finalized, where they talked continuously about having a child they could protect and treasure. Like those were two words that came up frequently: protect and treasure, which on the one hand, again, to me was, sort of further evidence of what had happened in their own upbringings, and they're wanting then to have a child, not to have the same life that they had, but this idea that I'm going to have a child to protect and treasure it feels like an awfully small and narrow life for that child. but that's what they wanted, and I think that certainly set the tone for their entire parenting philosophy. I start there also because when I talk about their entire parenting philosophy, a critical piece, not even piece, sort of center of my life as well, is I am a Black person. I'm a Black woman. My parents were white, so this is a transracial adoption. Because it was so critical that they have children for something to live for validation, to right the wrongs of their past, it was very important to them that I not be considered Black, that I not see myself as Black, that they did not see me as Black. And I know we'll talk, and I want to talk quite a bit about racism and privilege and sort of all of these things that I think some of us have gotten very good at talking about or comfortable about talking about. But I think a big piece, and all of that was true in my life as well, but a big piece for my parents was to stay alive, to stay psychologically healthy. It was so important for my mother to have a child, quote unquote, of her own. It was impossible for me to be Black. I had to be like her. I had to be the vision of a child that belonged to her. And therefore I could not be Black because she and my father were white. And that was an impossibility. And so I was told, I was always told I was adopted. I don't remember ever being told I was adopted. And I used to say I was given very positive messages about being adopted, which were, we wanted a baby so badly, and God said, we had a very special baby for you, and this is who she is. We were not otherwise a religious household, but like that was the story. But that I was always told, you're not Black. You are not Black. You are not Black. You are not Black.
Like actually those words?
Those words. You are not Black.
So that wasn't just like this feeling, I can't say I'm Black, or this, it was verbatim said to you that.
It was an explicit directive. You are not Black. So then it begs the question, okay, well, what am I? what am I?
I know you're waiting for me to say something because I'm just like have this puzzled look on my face because I'm like, oh, I thought you meant this was just sort of, we're just pretending we're all the same, like a colorblind kind of thing. But no.
And it's interesting you use the word colorblind, which I know, again, like today we sit around and we say, oh, well, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we used to talk about colorblindness because we thought that was the right thing, but we now understand that is devaluing really important differences in people, and that's not honoring them, so we don't talk about colorblindness anymore. My house was never colorblind. Never. There was no colorblindness in my house. They saw it and it wasn't okay. And so it was explicitly ignored, explicitly pushed to the side. And so it was, you are not Black. And again, in big part, this came from the fact that biologically, DNA wise, I know now I am 50% Black, 50% white. And I know that through DNA tests. Growing up, and my mother saying, you're not Black, you're not Black, you're not Black. You're not Black, your mother was white, and your father was half Black and half white. Again, very important for me to know that I'm more white than Black. That was another thing I was told repeatedly. You're more white than Black. You're not Black. You're more white than Black. And so that was something that continues to take a lot of work on my part. It's also why I open by saying, I identify as Black. I think I went through a period of identifying as biracial or Black biracial. I have since learned that being biracial in the adoption industry is a selling point, and that it's important to talk about and to raise up the white part of the child because that makes them more desirable. And that was something I certainly then went back and saw in my childhood. It was critical that my parents drilled into me how white I was. Even though the mirror said to me, but I'm not, but I don't look like everybody else. The other really important part is when I say everybody else, I grew up in a, state of New Hampshire is nearly 100% white. The town that I lived in, very small town, growing up, it was about 4,000 people. Today it's about 10,000 people, so still tiny, tiny. The first year for which there was race data available was 1990, and Blacks were 0.3% of the population. 0.3 in 1990 when I was 13.
So when you lived there, it was you? It was you.
It was me. There were one or two other kids in school, but I never saw, there was not a Black adult in any school I attended until I went to college. And I use those words carefully, Black adult, because there were no teachers, there were no administrators, there was no janitorial staff. There was nobody in the lunchroom. There was no guidance counselor, like white adults. I only ever saw one Black adult growing up. I played on a sports team with two Black sisters in another school in another town, and their mother was Black. And so I saw her sometimes, but that was the only Black adult that I interacted with until I got to college, or even saw. That wasn't on television until I got to college. I was in my 40s before I started looking for my biological parents. I feel now I think oh my God, that's so late. I hear all these stories about teenagers and people in their 20s, and I'm like, oh my God, what was I doing? But I think there were probably in hindsight, there's probably two reasons why I never looked. One is that I knew I would need to do it in secret. This was not a conversation I could have with my adoptive parents. And in fact, my mother was incessant my entire life. I'm your mother. I'm your mother. I'm the only mother you have. Even on rare occasion when there was acknowledgement that I was adopted, the term that she used was the birth mother. Not my birth mother, the birth mother, to maintain that distance. And so I forgot. It sounds silly now to say that, but I forgot I had a family that wasn't them, because I feel like I was brainwashed into thinking I'm it. And in fact, my mother used to say to me frequently because it was a very strict household as well. And, I would want to do something or go somewhere that my mother didn't want me to do. And she would say, it's better to have a mother that loves you, which meant, well, those other kids' parents that are letting them go to that party, their parents don't love them. And you would rather have a mother that loves you than a mother that doesn't. And so it's better to have a mother that loves you. And so I think that was one big reason why I didn't search. When I got to the point where I started seriously thinking about it, my mother said, first she said, well, I don't mind if you search. And I said to her, I don't need your permission. She later wrote me an email, and she said, well, it's something that I would want us to do together. I would want to search for the birth mother together so that I could meet this woman and thank her for the wonderful gift that she gave me.
This is when you're in your 40s?
Yes. Yeah. I'm at this time, I think I'm 41, maybe 41-ish. Yes. Yes. You're making a face, Haley.
I just wonder, like, when can we grow up? Like, when are we allowed to just do our own thing? It's so, like, I know where this story is going. I have the, benefit of knowing you. And it just makes me so mad. I can't, like.
Protect and treasure.
No, but see, when you say that, I'm like, oh, cute. Baby Sullivan in a literal treasure box with the key, no sunlight, so you turn white, I guess. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh.
I want to, well, maybe we'll talk about that now. I was going to say that the thank for the wonderful gift you've been given. I want to stick on that for a moment, because I think it's something that's really important as well, which is, and again, like I'm not the first adoptee to be called a gift, right? A lot of us get called gifts. And I don't know any adoptees who like that term or find it endearing in the objectification of it. But I think it's particularly problematic and insidious when you put it in the larger race context. And of course, obviously, people can hear my voice. I'm American, so I acknowledge my vantage point is very much when I'm talking about race and those sort of things. I'm talking about race in the United States. And when I'm talking about race in the United States, I'm talking about Black people in the United States versus white people in the United States, which I recognize there's a lot of other experiences that aren't that. But this country, the United States, has a history of Black children being gifted to white women. It is the way that white land and property owners, property to include enslaved people, to include Black humans, it's how they dealt with property and inheritance at a time when women couldn't inherit. And so they would gift their slaves, their property, to their daughters. And so as an adoptee, as any adoptee of any color, and we talk about commodification and the adoption industrial complex and, the objectification, the exchange of us for money is something many adoptees feel. But when you're talking about Black children and white adoptive parents, first of all, there wasn't a gift. You bought me. You bought a human. You signed a contract, you exchanged money, and you bought a human. We have another name for that besides adoption. At one time, we called it the slave trade. And if that makes you uncomfortable and you would rather call it a gift, we had a name for that too. It was called the slave trade.
Oh.
And so it's an important, not a week goes by and I don't think about that. And so I think it's important. And when I finally decided I was going to start looking, and I knew I had to go to my parents because it was a private adoption. And I asked first my father, because I didn't think the conversation with my mother would go well. And I asked him, and I had a conversation with him, and then I sent an email asking for any records they had of my adoption. And it was a polite email, and I think it's the best way to put it. It was polite. And he emailed back and was angry. he was angry because I didn't start the email with "Dear Mom and Dad" and sign it "Love me." And he later said, well, he apologized and said, "I got angry because it felt like you thought you were entitled to something."
No.
They sent the records, which was not a lot. It was maybe a dozen pages or so, a couple of baby books. That's where I got the clipping from. But in the dozen pages or so of records, there were some correspondence with their attorney, including the attorney requesting money, which really were for hospital bills for my birth mother. And so there were 3 documents that were that about money changing hands. And my parents had redacted all the dollar amounts. They blacked out the dollar amounts on those 3 documents, which again, I think says a lot more about them than it does about and how they felt about what they were doing than anything else. And I asked my father, I said, help me understand why you would black out this information. And I think I was looking for some acknowledgement, some sort of internal searching of like, why would I do that? And so I asked, and he just said, "You don't need to know that information. It's not relevant to you." I had also at the time, as I'm doing this, I am, going to therapy, doing all the things one does when they reach their mid-40s. But really just seeking to understand this, this relationship that had been, with my parents throughout my life that never quite felt right. I never felt heard, like all of these sort of things, and doing sort of more and more self-searching, and found Adoptees On and started listening to that, and reached out to my father and said, I think I need a break. I need a break from Mom. Like her emotional needs are too much, and it's too much for me. And he said, "She needs a relationship with you or she will kill herself," which to me was the acknowledgement of something I always felt was there, but also an acknowledgement that you have a job to do. That old newspaper clipping from 1977 that said, "Yeah, I need something to live for." You have a job to do. And so, for him, me for the first time at, 43, saying, "This is my need, like these are my emotional needs," and to have him say, "Okay, fine, but her needs come first," to me was sort of the last piece of evidence, I think, is the best word I can think of, that like things aren't going to change. I think they have a lot of work to do on themselves that has nothing to do with me, and like nothing with our relationship is going to change until that happens. And so there was a little bit more email exchange back and forth, and then finally an email from him that said, basically, we're not going to exchange emails with you anymore. We'll only speak live. We'll fly to you anytime. We have no problem doing that, but like we're only gonna talk live. Which again was like, well, it doesn't matter what you want. This is what we want. And so that was the last communication I had with them. And that was last year. And I, at that point, I cut off contact then. And things have happened since then, obviously, but I will pause there. Maybe on that piece.
It's a lot. Thank you so much for sharing those things. I know that you've come to a lot of these realizations like post, like there's the before life where you're just kind of going along, and you must have understood at some point that there's these, racist connotations of you, like you can't be Black, like from them. But like, when did you really come into that awareness? Like, did that prompt your search? Oh, I forgot I had other people out there. Like, because you're living as a Black woman in America and a super successful executive, and noticing that you are few and far between in your business life. And like, there's so many things about your life that I only know because I'm a friend, but I'm wondering how you discovered, like, was this like all of a sudden a realization, or it was just this like a slow unpacking, and the more you read about race, you're like, oh, these things, like what was it for you? Can you pinpoint that now?
It felt sudden, but I don't know if it was sudden. The part that is really hard, I think, for other people to understand is what it was like to be an only. The only kid in school, the only kid at sports practice, the only kid in the town, the only kid. And while there are, and I have read, wonderful and validating stories of Black people, non-adoptees, growing up being the only, when they went home at night, they still had their parents. Or I hear, transracial adoptees who talk about predominantly white. And so they had the one friend, or they had the one, or, their mom would take them to, the Black hairdresser. And that was an awakening. I had none of that. There was none of that for me anywhere. And this was, this is before, I grew up before the internet. I grew up at a time when, representation on television. Again, the first half of my life in my parents' house, there was no cable. Even we got cable finally when I was in high school, but even there was no representation on television. I grew up in the era certainly of the Cosby Show, but the Cosbys was a doctor and a lawyer living in the city. I had blue collar parents, and I lived in the country. So, like, I did not see myself in the Cosbys. The only other, and I say the only other because there were other Black people on television too, but the other one that stuck out for me was Webster. And I don't know if you had this show in Canada.
I don't know what that is.
Okay. All right. I know you're going to have listeners that remember Webster, but for those that don't, Webster was a transracial adoptee. He's a little Black boy, and he had two white parents. But here's the key with Webster. He called his parents, he called his father George, which again, in my house, totally, you do not call people by their first names. Aunts and uncles were always even aunts and uncles, like what have you, like you don't. So that, like right there was just not, the height of disrespect in my house. And he called his mother ma'am. And so while I never could have articulated it as a child, certainly, I think back on that now. And I'm like, you have a white, affluent couple with a little Black boy, and he calls her ma'am. And so I was not anywhere on television. There wasn't anywhere. And it wasn't even until I got to college. I went to college outside of New York City. Very diverse college. And I remember one of my classmates who was Black saying to me in the first couple of weeks of school, "Oh, why don't you join the Black Student Union?" And I thought, why? Like, why does she want me to join the Black Student Union? I didn't get it. Like, I truly didn't get it at all.
I've talked to a couple of other transracially adopted people. So I think they were all women of color. And they have told me either on the show or in private that they like still get surprised when they look in the mirror? They're like, "Oh, I'm not white." Like, did you have that? It sounded to me like you knew you were Black, like that wasn't necessarily your experience.
I knew I was Black, but growing up in an all-white rural area, the only model I had for Black people was the same stereotypic model that white people have. Black people live in the city. Black people listen to hip hop music. Black people dress this way. Like the monolith, Black people are a monolith. And that's not me.
So you get asked to join the Black Student Union, but you're like, "Oh, that's not me."
Yeah, like why would I join the Black Student Union? My friends were all white. And what I would have told you at the time was that, look, they put me with a white roommate and we turned out to be friends. So, your roommate's your roommate. I don't have a choice. And she knew someone else who was white. And so she became my friend. And my white friends were all from the suburbs and the Black girls were from the city. And again, I don't have anything in common with people from the city. I have something in common with people from the suburbs, which again, at the time I would have told you has nothing to do with race. Today I would tell you it had everything to do with race. Everything to do with race.
So, like, looking back, are you unpacking adoption stuff along with race things? Like, is that intertwined for you? Or was it race first? Was it just like all together? Can you even separate that?
It is today, I believe. You can't separate it. You cannot, don't try. It's completely intertwined. And as I said, like I used to say, I grew up with very positive messages about being adopted. You're loved, you're wanted, it was never a secret that I was adopted. And I know people say, well, of course they had to tell you, you didn't look like them. But I think as adopted kids, we know, like you think what happens in your own house is normal. That's why I thought my own house was normal for so long, despite the adoption piece of it. And so I knew and was never embarrassed and never felt badly, about being adopted. But I did feel badly about being Black because I was made to feel very badly about not being white, about being Black. And now it is completely intertwined. And again, in the United States, if you are seeing those things as separate, if you are seeing the impacts of adoption as wholly separate from race dynamics in the United States, you are doing some pretty fantastical mental gymnastics to save yourself. It is not reality. Because as we said, paying for the exchange of humans, you are buying a baby. You are buying a human.
Well, and you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the word gift and, children as commodities, and this, especially in the biracial market, if you're white passing, if your new baby can be white passing, they cost more. Like, do people know that?
Yeah. It's exactly that. It's exactly that. And the other piece that's related to this. So growing up, like many kids, I had chores. And some chores I didn't mind, other chores I hated. I think that made me a normal kid. And I wanted an allowance so badly because I wanted independence and I wanted, it didn't matter how, I would have been happy with pennies, but I wanted an allowance so badly for all that it represented. And I remember making chore charts for myself of like, here's all the chores I will do, and here's how much you'll pay me for each chore. And again, like if I did all the chores on the list, which is probably a couple of hours of work a week, I think I'd have made $1.50. So like, just to be really clear on what I was asking for. But my parents they refused to give me an allowance. And their rationale was, well, anytime, if you want to go somewhere, like if you want to go to the movies with your friends, we just give you money to go. Which was true, which was absolutely the truth. And as a kid, it was really frustrating because I thought, well, but like what I understood, which is true, is like, well, but then you're still in control of everything. Like I don't have the autonomy then to like buy a pack of gum instead of like soda. I don't know, because you're controlling the money. And again, I didn't have language for it, but as a small child, I sort of understood this. Now put that in the lens of race. You have a Black child performing household duties for you without remuneration. And I get it. Like I can hear the people being like, that's ludicrous. Kids should do chores. It's the value of hard work. Like, listen, I've been working for money since I was 14. So like, I get it. I get it. And I understand that. But what I'm suggesting is you cannot ignore the larger social context of white people who have purchased a Black child and are now commanding that child to perform work, whether or not they like it, for what? Room and board? There's a larger context, and it's an uncomfortable context. And so let's just stop and think about that.
It's so funny that you like gave that. Just wait. I know you're going to have this argument because I was going to jump in and be like, no, okay, so what about the people that say that? So look at that. We're on the same wavelength. Okay. So we're talking about race and, I am with you. I am trying to understand. I have seen lots of white adoptees make similar statements about adoption being a form of slavery, and it makes me really uncomfortable. And it's, I'm like, we can't say that. That's a no-go zone. We can't say that. We have not experienced the racism and all of the, horrible, all the things about slavery. We can't say that. So to hear you as a Black woman explaining it in that way, what do you see when you see a white adoptee saying something like, oh, adoption's like slavery? And it's like, ooh, like even asking this question, I'm like, should I be asking this? I don't think so. I don't know.
I think we need to be really careful with the words that we use. And I'm saying we on purpose because I put myself in that bucket too. About really careful when we make analogies, what we're trying to say, and the point that we're trying to make. As a Black woman, I would argue that the trauma that is in my ancestry, that is in my DNA, is different than that in a white person's body and their DNA. Not better, worse, harder, like all those sort of things. We're not comparing traumas, but it's different. And certainly, again, in the United States, given the history of the United States and the history of white people and Black people in the United States, I think we should be really thoughtful and really careful with the words that we're using.
Thank you. I think that has kept my initial reaction intact, that as white people, we definitely should not be saying, see, adoption's like slavery. That's not that's not our place. Okay. I'm going to shift just slightly because I'm curious your thoughts on this, and I've been trying to get at it, and I'm not sure if you've fully unpacked this either. But I know you're an ultra runner, which means you run, hundreds and hundreds of miles at a time, which is, woo, that's wild. I don't know. I've only known one other person in my life that does that. And it's just kind of mind-boggling to me that humans are capable of such a thing.
Yeah.
And I also heard you talk about in another interview about running that you can accomplish this run and you wake up a totally different person because you go to sleep, having done this. And when you wake up, like you have that. And so recently you had like this whole huge life change. You moved, you got divorced, you literally changed your name, you moved across the country, and I'm wrapping in unpacking race and unpacking adoption all with that. And so now you wake up and you're in New York and you're Sullivan and you're a totally different person. Is that true? You're never supposed to ask yes or no questions. So, I want more than that. But, I'm like thinking about, oh my gosh, you just accomplished like running a couple 100 miles and you wake up and you're like, now I'm the person that did that. But you just like new person the next day.
Yeah. So it's a good question. So starting with your like, I want to hit on the point about running because I think again, maybe you can sort of explain it this way. As you said, an ultra run is technically anything longer than marathon length. So anything longer than 26.2 miles. Shortest ultra distance is tends to be 50 kilometers, so about 31 miles. They go up from there. The reason I love it, and particularly the 100-mile distance, is it's not when you go to sleep and wake up that you're a different person. It's that from the time you cross the start line till the time you cross the finish line. And the reason that's important is because you're awake that entire time.
Yep.
And for most people, non-elite runners, of which I am a non-elite runner, you're looking at anywhere between 23 and 30 hours to complete a 100-mile race, depending on the terrain. And so you're up that whole time. And there are times when you're in pain. There are times when you're hungry. There's times when you want to throw up. There's absolutely at least one really good cry that happens during that. But that when you get up and you cross the start line, when this is over, I will be a different person. I will not be the same person when this run is over. And, the decision to change my name happened, I think, quite quickly, but all at the same time, which was I got my original birth certificate, which, being born in the state of New Hampshire, is a state that allows unfettered access. So I acknowledge, for me, it was very easy, and I am privileged in that. I sent a check for $15, and 4 weeks later, I had my birth certificate. Whatever first name was on my birth certificate had been whited out. And I could see that there was something there, and it had been covered over with whiteout and the words baby girl typed on top. And the words baby girl are in a different font that appears nowhere else on the birth certificate. I'm not in reunion. I've yet to find my mother. They think it's a fake name on my birth certificate. I've been working with an organization, the Washington Adoption Reunion Movement, who have been wonderful in helping me. But I got my birth certificate. I saw that the name had been whited out. That was a different story than my adoptive mother had told me. My adoptive mother told me they called her from the hospital when I was born because the birth mother didn't want me to go overnight without a name. And so she was called to name me. I don't have any idea whether or not that's true. But my birth certificate says baby girl. So I'm baby girl Sullivan on my birth certificate. And so I said, I want Sullivan back. So I took that as my first name. Through DNA testing, DNA told me that the Black half of me arrived in the United States through North Carolina. And so I can trace that ancestry. I did find my father. He's passed away, so I never got to meet him. But he and his entire family, and that the whole Black side of my family, is in North Carolina. And so I took Carolina as my middle name. And my last name, I had this realization that, I was a Black child adopted by white parents. I am twice divorced from white men, and had this realization that I am in my 40s and I'm a Black woman who has never had a last name that didn't belong to a white man first. And again, we have a name for that in this country. we have a history of changing people's names to the white patriarch in the family. And so I said, I want a name that's only mine and doesn't belong to anybody else. I did think about taking the name of a famous feminist, famous crusader, and that felt a little pretentious. And so I said, you know what? Summer is my favorite season. I was born in the summer. Summer will always keep me warm. And so I want my last name to be Summer. I have since had someone point out to me that, but Donna Summer is pretty amazing. I'm like, yes, Donna Summer's amazing, but I didn't name myself after Donna Summer. It's just a coincidence. But I did it. I made the decision to do it. I filed. And on the day that I went to the courthouse to file, I wasn't mentally prepared for this, but they were actually able to take me right away. So when I went down to what I thought was file some paperwork, I wound up with a legal name change on the same day. And I hadn't expected that. And so it was like I went over lunch, I became a different person. And then it was like, oh, okay, I don't, what do I do with this? And I want to share that story for a second, because I think it's an important one is, I had a lot of anxiety, because you have to fill, as part of the paperwork, you have to fill out why you want the name change. And you have to go before a judge. And it's a quick hearing, but the judge is essentially making, part of what you do is attest to the fact that you are not doing this to, escape criminal liability. You're not a registered sex offender, all of these things. But you have to say why you want to do it.
But and just also, you're a lawyer, so you're familiar with this process. It's not like anxiety of going before a judge. It's all the other things.
It's all the other things. Because I thought, what if the judge is an adoptive parent? That's all I kept thinking about. What if the judge is an adoptive parent and they think this is horrendous and horrific and they say no? And that's what I was terrified about that. And so I just wrote, I'm an adopted person and my name was changed at birth and I want it back. I want my name back. That's all I wrote. And I was the third person to have their hearing. The first person was actually, I think it was a woman getting married. And so that was that. The judge, by the way, so when the judge walked in, he appeared to be Korean. And the reason I point that out is because, again, I was like, okay, it's not a white adoptive mother. So I've dodged that bullet. Appears to be a Korean man. So, okay. So, and I really was put at ease by the fact that this wasn't a white person, because I thought there might be a better chance that this person will understand. And so the first woman goes. The second person that went was someone who all signs pointed to the fact that this was someone who's transitioning their gender. And they put in there, I think they just put something like, I want to change my name, like nothing else. And I was like, They knew how to do it. Like, why didn't I just put, I want to change my name? Like, nobody told me I didn't have to put like some explanation, but like they went and it was fine and it was great. And so now it's my turn and I'm last and I come forward and the judge sort of does this half, he's like he's got kind of a script that he's got to read through and he's kind of half reading the document and half saying his script. And so he says, okay, you want to change your name because you're an adopted person and you want your name back. And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, that sounds like a very good reason. And at that point, I almost started to cry and I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And I just nodded my head and I thought, oh my God, my judge is an adoptee. I don't know if that's true. But he finished reading and he reads the bottom of the order, as of this day, the petitioner, said my old name shall, herefore be known as Sullivan Summer. And then he said, thank you. It's a pleasure to have met you. And so it was a special lunch hour, special day. And I'm very thankful. I continue to be really, really thankful to that judge. Just understanding. Because I think if one thing I have learned as of late is not everybody understands. And I think as adoptees, we are always ready for the unwillingness to understand. And we are always ready for the invalidation. And that I was for sure ready for that walking in the door. And I feel like he saw me and gave me the opportunity to be validated in his courtroom.
Well, that's really beautiful and sad that it's unexpected,
Yeah.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you want to make sure you get to say before we do our recommended resources?
I think, and this would probably bring us into the recommended resources. I know you have a lot of, obviously a lot of adoptee listeners, and I'm, hopeful that some of what I've said have resonated with them and particularly those that were transracially adopted. I know you have a lot of adoptive parents that listen as well. And you have a lot of prospective or hopeful adoptive parents that listen too. And I do want to take a second and speak directly to them in particular, white adoptive parents in particular, and certainly white adoptive parents of Black and brown children, because I know a lot of what I've said is extremely uncomfortable. And that I think oftentimes the instinct is just to say, no, that's not true. No, that's true. No, that's ridiculous. No, I can't think about that. And white adoptive parents owe it to their children and to the Black community to listen and think about it and sit with it. Not everybody, but most people I know and interact with like to consider themselves very woke and very accepting and very, I love everybody. And of course, racism is horrible and no, we should not tolerate it. If you're a white person, you're playing a part. You have a part. You have a part in the interaction between white people and Black people in the United States. And you need to be really clear on what part you're playing. And if you are not actively out there, not making your Facebook posts and carrying your sign, If you are not actively out there teaching yourself and learning and challenging your own mindset, you are part of the problem. Full stop. And it's an uncomfortable reality. And I think if people are serious about changing race relations in the United States, then they need to be willing to take a hard look in the mirror as adoptive parents and understand the part that they're playing in that.
Thank you for that challenge. I really appreciate you just being direct with us. And I think it is super easy we see it all the time online, right? Oh, yes, no, I totally get that. But that doesn't apply to me. Like, it's very easy to do that.
Those people are horrible.
Oh, yeah.
Not
No.
me.
Yeah, which is really sad. I think that call does really tie into what we're going to recommend, because I feel like, okay, I've been podcasting for, I don't know, like 5.5 years now. And before that, I was kind of in like the online adoptee space on Twitter and things, but I didn't really know all the people that I know now and all the connections I have now and everything, just because of what I do. So, thank you that I get to do this. But I think I came in super naive, and, you start something up and you're really gung ho and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like the first person to like think of this. And then I'm the first person to write a piece about this. And I'm the first person to make this meme or whatever it is about being an adopted person, like saying the truth and saying the hard things about adoption. And over the last number of years, I've really had the humbling and to realize that people have been doing this work and saying those things that you just said that might seem, wow, that's really controversial and, a newer kind of thing to think. No. People have been saying these things for decades and decades and decades and decades before us. And so, you and I, Sullivan, are coming to this conversation with many, many years of people ahead of us who have done the work, done the research, done the teaching to help us understand. So acknowledging that. The thing I want to recommend, it goes along with that, and it actually has been recommended on the show before. It's a book called Outsiders Within, Writing on Transracial Adoption, and it's by Sun Young Shin, Julia Chinjari Opara, and Jane Jong Trinka. They're the editors. And as I said, it has been recommended before. It's such a powerful book. There's essays, poems, just a variety of writings. And it actually was first published in 20. No. The new edition is 2021. It was first published in 2006. And at the time, it must have been like, wow, I can't believe all these people are saying these true things. And now, this is like an anniversary edition, this special 2021. But the other piece I wanted to let people know that goes alongside of it is there's a 3-part series podcast by the editors of this book. And so I will link to this in the show notes. But it's on the podcast run by University of Minnesota Press. And the editors talk about these conversations. There's some readings and from the book as well. But I think it's just such a good representation of those who've come before and learning from people of color who have been saying these hard things. And it's taking some of us, myself included, like a long time to kind of catch up to what they've been saying and teaching. So that's Outsiders Within, Writing on Transracial Adoption. And the new edition, like the cover is really quite something. It's really beautiful. It is this really lovely pale pinkish color. And then there's like a power line with some birds. And there's one bird on the outside that is a different color, very much the outsider. So that's what I'd like to recommend.
I have that book on my shelf.
Oh, do you? Good.
Good. I do have it on my shelf.
Maybe you bought it because you listened to Adoptees On and you heard it as a recommended resource. Okay, good. Okay, good.
Probably University of Minnesota Press has got some really fantastic stuff. I ordered a whole bunch from them at one time, including that book.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. What did you want to recommend?
So I would like to recommend the National Association of Black Social Workers has a position statement from 1972 on transracial adoption that talks about many of the concerns that I've raised. As you well said, Haley, that there have been experts in the field of child welfare and childhood psychological safety that have been speaking authoritatively for decades and decades and decades. And I think when I discovered this, which is I found it in a reading somewhere, and it blew my mind, talking about many of the things that was beginning to concern me as I was doing my own work, and it caused me to ask myself, why don't more people know about this? And again, who are we choosing to listen to? I know you do so much work talking about advocating for adoptees, and we're saying we need to listen to adult adoptees. They're the experts. And so again, I know there are a lot of professionals, quote unquote, and not quote unquote professionals who work in the adoption industry. But here is a group of Black professionals who are highly knowledgeable and subject matter experts. And if we're not listening to them, why aren't we listening to them? And let's listen to what they have to say. So this position statement is something that is really, really powerful, and more people need to read it.
Yeah, they do. Okay, so 1972. This is still true. This part, I'm going to read this sign.
It could have been written yesterday.
Absolutely. The supply of white children for adoption has all but vanished, and adoption agencies, having always catered to middle-class whites, developed an answer to their desire for parenthood by motivating them to consider Black children. It could have been written yesterday. Yep, absolutely. Thank you. And we are going to link to a PDF of this. It's from, the link is from the National Association of Black Social Workers. But when you click on the PDF, it's an old copy with underlines and everything. It's like somebody, scanned in the archives kind of thing. But it is from them. So if you look at the link and you're like, oh, where is this from? It's don't worry. It's legit. Thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation, and you continue to, challenge me, and thank you for saying the hard, true things. If people want to connect with you, where can we connect with you online?
People can find me on Instagram at Sullivan Summer.
And there you can follow Sullivan's reading adventures.
I read a lot of books.
She reads a lot of books. And if you want to hear more Sullivan, you actually have been on Off Script before with me, the Patreon show. So you joined us for a book club once or twice, a couple times, I think. And also an Off Script.
2 or 3. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 2 or 3. And then we also read The Family Row together. Just some nice light reading. Yeah, that I can see that book from where I'm sitting right now. Oh, thank you so much. I've really appreciated our time together.
Thank you so much for having me, Haley.
Okay, I haven't done this for a while, but I'm going to leave you a little outtake at the very end of the show if you keep listening to the end. But Sullivan really is my real friend, and we actually connected during book club, and we have an Adoptees Only book club for Patreon supporters. And I tell you, some of the smartest, most thoughtful people attend book club, and I always leave thinking, wow, there are a lot of people in this world way smarter than me who have made really incredible observations that I would never have picked up on if it wasn't for book club. So I'm really grateful to have built friendships from that and to have learned from so many adoptees. And reading in community has really been a special thing that I didn't really anticipate. I know that sounds kind of silly, but I haven't been in a book club before starting one on Patreon for Patreon supporters, but for supporters of the show. But I have really learned a lot from participating. So anyway, that's a shameless plug for Patreon, but that is literally how the podcast continues to exist in this world. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to everyone who supports the show on Patreon or with your one-time donations. You're literally making the show possible, and I'm so grateful for your support. And let's talk again next Friday. I'm nervous too because you're my friend.
My palms are sweating.
You're my friend. Like a real friend, not just a pretend friend.
You know, this is we are really close to our 1 year friendiversary. Do you know that?
No.
It is I can probably go back and look, but it's imminent. It was the first week of March.
Come on.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember exactly where I was. So this would be, I remember exactly what episode I found and I listened to, and it made my head explode. And I listened all day and all night. I didn't go to sleep. And I listened, and at 3 a.m, I joined Patreon. And you sent me an email in the next, within hours, once you got up or what have you, because you always I think you check and make sure that I'm actually an adoptee. You sent me, because I joined Patreon and I think tried to join the Facebook group, sort of simultaneously. And you sent me an email that again was just I think you're checking to make sure you're actually an adoptee type email. And I think I had a little bit of word vomit, but I was conscious that I was having word vomit as I was doing it. And this was also via Facebook Messenger. And I was but anyway, yes, I'm just really excited to have found you. And you responded, "Oh my God, that's a lot. Are you okay?" And I was and now this woman thinks I'm a lunatic. I'm yes, I promise I'm okay. And I won't send any more emails. But it was a year ago. It was exactly a year ago.
Oh, bless my heart. Well, yeah, that seems about right. Yep. I don't remember that. I'm sorry. I don't remember that.
No, I wouldn't. No, that's why I told you, because I would not expect you to remember that at all. So that's why I was telling you.
Well, I have to look at my messages. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk
about March 1st.
Before and after and race and March. Oh my God, you did right a lot.
Did you find it?
March 9th. I have to scroll down. It's paragraphs.
I know. I'm oh my God, you're such a...
Are you okay? Seriously, how are you doing? Because this is a huge thing you're going through. Okay. Whew. All right, we're okay. We're good. Look at this. We got
now you don't want to be friends with me anymore. In hindsight.
I'm glad I blocked that out. We're gonna cut this all. We're just gonna put it at the end. It'll be the
the outtakes.
Yeah, the very end. So if people just happen to not switch to the next thing they're listening to, they'll just hear us
at the serious movie when then they do all the bloopers of the actors flubbing their lines at the end.
Exactly. Yeah, good. As long as you're okay with that, we'll do that.
Yes.
Okay, let's do this thing.